Hello students, in this video we will answer the questions from the lesson Indigo. 1. Answer the following. Why was Gandhi visiting Lucknow in 1916? Gandhi was visiting Lucknow in 1916 to attend the annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party held there. Where did Shukla meet Gandhi for the first time? Shukla met Gandhi for the first time at the annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party in Lucknow. Where did Gandhi stay in Muzaffarpur? Gandhi stayed in the home of Professor Maliks, a teacher in a government school in Muzaffarpur. Where was Champaran? Champaran was in the foothills of the towering Himalayas near the Kingdom of Nepal. Whom did Gandhi and Shukla want to meet at Patna? Gandhi and Shukla wanted to meet a lawyer named Rajendra Prasad, who later became the president of the Congress Party and of India. What was Gandhi's politics intertwined with? Gandhi's politics was intertwined with the practical, day-to-day problems of the millions. What did Shukla want Gandhi to do? Shukla wanted Gandhi to visit his district, Champaran. Whom did Gandhi send a telegram to in Muzaffarpur? Gandhi sent a telegram to Professor J.B. Kripalani of the Arts College in Muzaffarpur. What did the British Commissioner of the Tirhut Division ask Gandhi to do? The British Commissioner of the Tirhut Division bullied Gandhi and asked him to leave Tirhut immediately. Next we have answered the following in 30 to 40 words. Why was Professor Maliks' action of offering shelter to Gandhi extraordinary? Professor Maliks' action of offering shelter to Gandhi was extraordinary because he was a government professor and in smaller localities the Indians were afraid to show sympathy for advocates of Home Rule. How was a solution to the problem of indigo sharecroppers of Champaran found? Gandhi found a solution to the problem of indigo sharecroppers of Champaran by freeing them from fear. The peasants' demonstration around the courthouse was the beginning of their liberation from fear of the British. Why did Gandhi choose to go to Muzaffarpur first before going to Champaran? Gandhi chose to go to Muzaffarpur first before going to Champaran so that he could have a better understanding of the problems of the sharecroppers. He wanted to obtain more information about conditions than Shukla was capable of imparting. What was the incident that prompted Gandhi to raise his voice of protest against the British? The Champaran movement prompted Gandhi to raise his voice of protest against the British. It began when Raj Kumar Shukla came to Gandhi with the problem of exploitation of the peasants in Champaran. Where and when was the annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party held? The annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party was held in December 1916 in Lucknow. Who was Raj Kumar Shukla? Raj Kumar Shukla was a poor peasant from Champaran, Bihar. He was a sharecropper who wanted to inform Gandhi about the injustice done to them by the British landlords. Why was Raj Kumar Shukla described as being resolute? Raj Kumar Shukla was the one to ask Gandhi to visit his district. He followed Gandhi in different parts of the country and persisted in his efforts. Thus, Shukla is described as being resolute. Why was Gandhi not allowed to draw water from the well at Rajendra Prasad's house? Gandhi was not allowed to draw water from the well at Rajendra Prasad's house because he was mistaken to be an untouchable and it was believed that drops of water from the bucket filled by an untouchable would pollute the entire well. Did Gandhi chide the lawyers and decide to stop going to law courts? Gandhi chided the lawyers for collecting big fee from the poor sharecroppers. He decided to stop going to law courts because he felt that taking the cases of the sharecroppers to the court does little good. Since the poor peasants were crushed and fear-stricken, law courts seemed useless. It was essential for the farmers to be free from fear. It was the landlord system in the Champaran district. Most of the arable land in the Champaran district was divided into large estates owned by Englishmen. Indian tenants worked on this land. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 15% of their holdings with the chief commercial crop indigo and then surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was done by long-term contract. Name a few people who arrived from Bihar to support Gandhi at Champaran. Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore Babu, Maulana Mazharul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers arrived from Bihar to support Gandhi at Champaran. Why do you think Gandhi considered the Champaran episode to be a turning point in his life? Gandhi considered the Champaran episode to be a turning point in his life because this incident inspired him to urge the departure of the British. The Champaran incident grew out of an attempt to help the poor peasants in their protest against the British landlord. The movement met with unexpected success. Why did Gandhi oppose the idea of enlisting the assistance of Charles Frere Andrews even though he was a devoted follower? Gandhi opposed to the idea of enlisting the assistance of Charles Frere Andrews even though he was a devoted follower on the ground that it was a sign of weakness to take help of an Englishman. He believed that their cause was just and so they must rely on themselves to win the battle. Describe the exploitation of the indigo sharecroppers by the English landlords. How did Gandhi help them to get an honorable settlement? The English landlords forced the farmers to grow indigo in 15% of the land and deliver the entire indigo harvest to them as rent. But when Germany developed synthetic indigo, which was cheap, the indigo plantation at Champaran became meaningless. The landlords then obtained agreements from the sharecroppers to pay them compensation for the release of the land. But when the peasants understood the tricks, they wanted their money back. Gandhi began with gathering information about the landlord system. At the very outset, the British wanted to crush the movement and Gandhi got summons to appear in the court. However, the government remained baffled when there was a huge demonstration of thousands of peasants in support. The British were compelled by the circumstances to drop the case against Gandhi. Gandhi continued his fight against injustice along with a host of lawyers and with support from the poor farmers. A commission of inquiry was constituted and it brought strong evidence against the English landlords. The landlords were forced to make refunds. Thus, Gandhi helped the sharecroppers to get an honorable settlement. The Battle of Champaran is won, Gandhi exclaimed. Explain the context in which this was said. Gandhi stayed at Motihari, the capital of Champaran, in order to equip himself with necessary facts and information. On his way to a nearby village, he received an official notice from the superintendent of police to quit Champaran immediately, but Gandhi made it clear that he would disobey the order. As a result, he received a summons to appear in court the next day. All night Gandhi remained awake. He sent full report to the viceroy. He also informed Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with influential friends. The next morning, thousands of people held a spontaneous demonstration around the courthouse. The officials felt helpless and the government was baffled. Gandhi was released without bail and was allowed to remain at liberty. This spontaneous development was reflective of the beginning of the peasants' liberation from fear of the British. The court did not deliver the judgment for several days. Gandhi was set free without bail. Gandhi asked the prominent lawyers what they would do if he was sent to jail. After initial hesitation, they finally decided to accompany Gandhi to jail. This emboldened Gandhi and he declared, "The Battle of Champaran is won." Describe the efforts made by R.K. Shukla to persuade Gandhi to go to Champaran. Raj Kumar Shukla was a poor peasant from Champaran, Bihar. He was a sharecropper who wanted to inform Gandhi about the injustice done to them by the British landlords. He went to the December 1916 annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party in Lucknow to meet Gandhi. He requested him to visit his district. Gandhi told him that he had to go to other parts of India. Shukla accompanied him everywhere. He followed Gandhi to his ashram. For weeks he never left Gandhi's side and begged him to fix a date. Gandhi was impressed by the sharecropper's tenacity and story. He asked Shukla to meet him in Calcutta on a particular date. Shukla was sitting on his haunches at the appointed spot in Calcutta when Gandhi arrived and waited till Gandhi was free. Then the two of them boarded a train for the city of Patna in Bihar. Thus, Shukla successfully persuaded Gandhi to go to Champaran. Why do you think Gandhi considered the Champaran episode to be a turning point in his life? The Champaran movement grew out of Gandhi's attempt to remove the distress of thousands of poor peasants. It was the first mass movement in India. Gandhi fought against the injustice of the cruel landlords. The British landlords extorted money from the poor sharecroppers of Champaran. When the sharecroppers saw through the fraud, they demanded their money back. Gandhi arrived in Champaran and started by gathering the facts. He met with strong resistance from the British. Gandhi received official order to leave Champaran, but he disobeyed the order. As a result, Gandhi received summons from the court, but when Gandhi went to the court, it was crowded with thousands of peasants. The demonstration against the British was the beginning of the liberation from fear of the British. The inability of the officials to control the crowd proved their helplessness. The trial was postponed and finally dropped. This was followed by further demonstrations, investigations, etc., and finally a settlement was reached in favor of the Indians. This marked the first triumph of the civil disobedience in India, which made Champaran episode a turning point in Gandhi's life. How do we know that ordinary people too contributed to the freedom movement? The Champaran episode was the first landmark victory of freedom struggle. A simple step taken by a poor peasant named Raj Kumar Shukla led to a mass movement which shook the British authorities. This mass movement was possible only under the leadership of Gandhi. Before the arrival of Gandhi, the common masses were totally indifferent and unorganized. The Champaran episode has been considered as a turning point in the struggle for freedom. The resolution of Raj Kumar Shukla, the encouraging step taken by Professor Kripalani and his students by receiving Gandhi at the railway station, the courage shown by Professor Malkani by harboring Gandhi in his home, shows how ordinary people contributed fearlessly to the freedom movement. The civil disobedience movement was victorious for the first time in modern India. Since then, how do we know that ordinary people too contributed to the freedom movement? The Champaran episode was the first landmark victory of freedom struggle. A simple step taken by a poor peasant named Raj Kumar Shukla led to a mass movement which shook the British authorities. This mass movement was possible only under the leadership of Gandhi. Before the arrival of Gandhi, the common masses were totally indifferent and unorganized. The Champaran episode has been considered as a turning point in the struggle for freedom. The resolution of Raj Kumar Shukla, the encouraging step taken by Professor Kripalani and his students by receiving Gandhi at the railway station, the courage shown by Professor Malkani by harboring Gandhi in his home, shows how ordinary people contributed fearlessly to the freedom movement. The mass demonstration of the peasants was the beginning of the liberation from fear. The civil disobedience movement was victorious for the first time in modern India. Since then, participation of ordinary people continued in every movement, which finally uprooted the British Empire. What was the long-term contract between the English landlords and the sharecroppers of Champaran? Why did the sharecroppers protest this agreement? Most of the arable land in the Champaran district was divided into large estates owned by Englishmen. Indian tenants worked on this land. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 15% of their holdings with the chief commercial crop indigo and then surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was the long-term contract between the English landlords and the sharecroppers of Champaran. When synthetic indigo was developed in Germany, indigo plantation no longer remained profitable. The landlords released the tenants from the 15% arrangements. They obtained fresh agreements from sharecroppers to pay them compensation. Meanwhile, the illiterate peasants saw through the tricks of the landlord. They were not ready to pay the compensation and protested this agreement. What measures did Gandhi take to improve the cultural and social backwardness of the villages of Champaran? Gandhi helped the people of Champaran in more than one way. His approach was comprehensive. He did not confine himself only to political and economic issues. He wanted to fight the cultural and social backwardness in the Champaran villages. First of all, Gandhi stressed on education. He appealed for teachers and got a good response. Two young persons, Madhav Desai and Narhari Parikh, volunteered themselves for the work along with their wives. Several more volunteers came from other parts of India. Gandhi's son and wife arrived from the ashram. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages of Champaran. Kasturbai taught the ashram rules on cleanliness and sanitation. Besides, to improve the miserable health conditions, Gandhi got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. Thus, Gandhi gave full importance to social and educational issues too, and tried his best to do something to improve the condition of the village. With this, we come to the end of our video. Thank you for watching and please subscribe to our channel.